Well, welcome to the CenterPoint podcast. Today we're talking about marriage, and we have Kyle and Amanda Bailey. So, welcome.
Thank you.
I am guest hosting today
Yay!
because we're interviewing you guys on marriage, and we want to know all about it.
Uh-oh.
All right. You ready?
Now, I guess one of the first questions: how did you guys meet?
Okay. You want to go?
Go ahead,
You want
babe.
to do it?
No,
No?
it's all you.
How did we meet? Okay, so we were in Tallahassee, Florida, and her family moved down from Franklin, Tennessee.
Sure.
Yes, Franklin, Murfreesboro, that area. And they happened to move into a neighborhood that was near the church that I was at. You know, Pastor Eli was here last weekend. It was his church, Lifeway Community Church. And I was serving in the youth department. And we met there. I mean, obviously we saw each other at church here and there. It wasn't like we really knew each other. But then we both started going to a life group with our friends who are still friends of ours today, Chris and Anka Pink. And so that was probably, in my opinion, where we technically met, was at the life group. And, you know, we took like a little trip down to what's called the Holy Land Experience in Orlando. It's like a recreation of Israel. It has all these exhibits and stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. I've been there a few times, and we went there as a like life group because it's like this educational experience and stuff. And Anka had family in that area where we could all, you know, kind of camp out at her mother's house and then get up and, you know, whatever. So anyways, that was kind of the first time we actually spent time together, I would say. Like it was in a group setting. And, you know, I remember that, you know, there was a reservation on my part because Amanda had a 2-year-old at the time named Wallace, who is now 12, almost 13. And so, you know, I did not want to, you know, pursue a relationship with someone who had a child not because I have a bias there, but because if it didn't work out, then you mess up two people's lives or whatever, you know? So, I did pray about, you know, like if that was what the Lord wanted. And I just said, you'll have to make it very clear. And then I would do it. And so that was probably like quite a while before we actually started dating. So, yeah. So at some point she started serving in the youth ministry, and, you know, we would after Wednesday night, we would go take all the youth out to Wingstop or whatever. And so there was a little bit more context for us to, you know, communicate, get to know each other. But I didn't really know that she was interested in me. But someone told me she was. You know, I was just kind of oblivious to it. I was at a point in my life where I didn't really want to date anybody because I was a pastor. And as a result, I know that you can't just marry anybody, you know, unfortunately, you know, even if they're a Christian. It's a special thing. I think I personally think that there has to be a calling to be married to a pastor because there's just a lot of flying darts. And so I just wanted to focus on the work that God had called me to, and, you know, just let him bring the person that was for me into my life. And so when I realized that she was interested, I thought, wow, that all, you know, it was like all the dots began to connect. And I recognized that I thought maybe she was the person that I was supposed to be with. So it was really a strange feeling.
So there was a progression. How long did that take?
Oh, long time. Go ahead.
Long time for what?
She knows how long it took.
The progression.
The progression of meeting in Bible study and becoming interested, and then to the point where you thought she might be the one.
Yeah.
So the actual like part of us actually meeting to knowing, I mean, it was like immediate. I think we both knew that we weren't going to get into a relationship unless both people were willing to go towards marriage. And so that was something we talked about from I mean, like the very beginning. I mean, it was like before we even went on our first date. I'm like,
Yeah.
listen, I wouldn't be here with you if this is. I was very, very direct, and I did. I told him. I said, I'm not. I wouldn't be here with any person of the opposite sex unless this is going to go into marriage. So you need to make the decision now, because I had a child. You know, I had to think of him. I had to think of myself.
Mhm.
But the progression of it all was a lot longer than how quick it was when we got together. So God is just so amazing,
Mhm.
because when you look at Kyle, I mean, we talk about the timeline of the church. And so the timeline of Kyle and I, and how we kind of ended up where we were, our timeline is like exactly the same, of coming back to Christ and completely surrendering and turning our lives over. And then God just continued to like grow in us, you know, constantly, because we were seeking him. And so our timelines line up. But the one thing that happened, so I think it was 2010 when we actually, you know, met and, you know, went to the Holy Land experience and all of that. We married in 2009 was when we went to the Holy Land experience. 2010,
It was, yeah, it was November when we started dating.
right, we got engaged.
Oh, we got engaged. Yeah, we started dating in August of 2010. Yeah.
And then 2011 is when we married. So, I mean, when you look at that timeline of progression, we were married in early of 2011, April. And so, but before that, what God was doing behind the scenes was much longer than that. So 2 years before him and I ever met, this is a story that I'm kind of hesitant to share. So there's probably much more detail to the story that I
Okay.
would do, maybe one-on-one with somebody, when God leads that to happen. But I was at a place in time where our church did a fasting every year. And so 2 years before this, I was doing this fasting, and I have this, you know, infant child, and I had debt, and I had no job. I couldn't get assistance from the government. I mean, I was kind of in this place of, God, you got to step in and help me out here. And I was desperate. My heart was to be married. My heart was to have a family. My heart was to not be single and raise this child, even though, you know, I messed up and did things the wrong way. I knew that God was calling me to have a family and to have a husband. And so I desired that. And I was willing to wait as long as it took. So a part of this fasting was I sat down and I said, all right, God, here's my list. Here's my list that I'm going to give to you. So I did a 21-day Daniel's fast, and I did it completely, you know,
Wow.
from day 1 to 21. And so throughout this time, God was just checking off. I had like 5 things on my list: to grow deeper with him, to get a job, to find a husband. I mean, that was on my list. I'm like, this is weird. Like 21 days, God, like, I mean, you can do it, right? But I wasn't expecting him to just give me the person within that time. I was just expecting for him to know that I was laying it at his feet. And so, as long as it took, whether it was in that 21 days or not, I knew that God had it at his feet and that he was the one that was going to see it come to pass in his time. So I was just laying it there at the altar. And sure enough, 21 days, everything was checked off. And except for, you know, the husband, where I'm like, okay, I'm a person of faith, so I stood on faith. And I went to sleep, you know, took a Sunday nap, and God just gave me this incredible dream of some people that were in my life, some guys that were in my life that I knew. And it was just one after another where it's like, Amanda, that's not the one. That's not the one. And it came to this moment in time where Kyle was in my dream. This is before we ever physically met at church. We never knew each other at church, nothing. But I knew who he was. So he was younger than me. He was someone that wasn't even in my radar. I'm like, this is crazy. And I remember waking up from the dream and just running. I was living with my mom, my stepdad at the time. I just ran into them and I'm like, Mom, this is crazy. Like, but I know what this means. This means I'm going to marry this guy. And from that moment, they're like, okay, I believe
Yeah.
that. And they stood on faith with me. So I stood in faith for 2 years going crazy, crying, like, God, this is insane. Like, and then we go to the Holy Land and then nothing happens. And I'm like, come on, God, like, this has got to be
Yeah.
real. I know what you showed me. And so I just kept holding on to that. And even after we went to the Holy Land experience, like, he never pursued me until I started working in the youth. And I didn't work in the youth to meet him. I worked in the youth because I knew I was called there. And so we just started kind of hanging out after. And I mean, we would spend like an hour or two after everyone would be gone. And so God kind of just let things happen. But I do believe it was a part of our faith of knowing that God was the one that was going to do it all.
Yeah.
And when we met, it was instant because we knew that God was the one calling us to be there.
Mhm.
And it was awesome.
Yeah.
So now I
Yeah.
have a question with
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
You said in the dream that God had basically shown you who your future husband was.
Yeah.
But you had to wait for it for a few years.
Like a really long time. Yeah.
So how did you like keep the faith? I know you said you cried a lot.
Yeah.
But like, how did that go down for you? Because I know a lot of young people who are especially single
Yeah.
really struggle with keeping the faith that this will happen.
Yeah. I think it was just, I knew that I knew that I knew. I knew what I saw. I knew what he showed me. And I knew that in order for it to happen, he'd have to bring it to pass. My life was like, I worked overnight in a hotel. So the people who were coming in the hotel were like construction workers or government workers in Tallahassee. So I'm like, all right, God, like if this is not real, then you got to show me it's not real. But I didn't doubt it. Like there was no doubt in my mind what God showed me in that dream. It was as real as just, touching each other here. Like I could grab a hold of all of it. And in the dream, just the what God showed me of the other people in my life, I don't know. I knew what I knew. And I feel like sometimes that doubt can seep in, and I continued to press forward and say, God, no, you're going to do this. And even when Kyle wouldn't show me any attention, we'd be in like Bible study, and I'm like, God, he doesn't even look at me. Like he doesn't even say hi. Like he was like, this is not going to happen. So I just continued to say, all right, Lord, if it is going to happen, then you're the one who's going to have to make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's hard. There's nothing easy about it.
Yeah.
No, it's
Nothing
true.
easy about it.
So then now you got married
Mhm.
and you were living in Texas. You have children now.
In Florida.
Yes.
You said
Florida.
Texas.
I
Yeah.
did. Florida is what I meant to say.
Yeah.
So how did that happen with like getting married and growing your relationship? Because you had things leading up. You had the whole couple years of preparation process of waiting.
Right.
Yeah.
So then after you hit the married point, what did you do?
So before we even got married, I told Kyle about the dream. And I'm like, all right, God, I'm going to tell him.
That's not scary at all.
No, it
Yeah.
was like frightening. I'm like, he's either going to run away or, and he didn't. He was like, okay, all right. So let's go on a date. Like, I mean, it was like, all right, let's go. And then I'm like, okay, this is weird. Like he's as crazy as I am.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I don't know. After we got married, you want to take that?
Sure. So when we got married, Wallace was almost 3.
He was 3.
He was 3.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he was 3. So I don't know how to describe this, but I had some bad advice on how to be a husband.
Okay.
Yeah. So I messed things up pretty good in the first year.
So then let's hear how the bad advice and how you messed things up, and then how you realized it was bad advice.
Yeah.
That's
So I had what we call an old-timey Pentecostal preacher, not Pastor Eli, another person who did our pre-marriage counseling, and his theme was you're the head of the household and your wife needs to submit. And so it was I was just kind of still trying to learn all the everything it means to be a follower of Christ. And even though I was a pastor, I was young. I was in my early 20s, So I kind of trusted what he was telling me. And so I was like kind of authoritarian in the relationship, not abusive per se, but just, thinking that it's going to be my way or the highway. And this was just coming from, really, really negative influences. There is a strain of like kind of real religious Christianity where that's emphasized, like it's almost like marriage is like slavery, yeah, it was bad. So as a result, it put us in a really bad relationship during the first few months of our marriage. And, when you first tie the knot, your carnal nature kicks in because now you've got them.
Mm-hmm.
So your carnal nature gets tempted to just like kind of be controlling or be, not engaged, or, each marriage or each relationship, faces different struggles in that area. Not everybody does. Some people just have great training and upbringing and it all goes good. But her and I came from very dysfunctional backgrounds. So as a result, we had to go to counseling in our first year of marriage, and it was awesome. So in that counseling process, there was a lot of deconstruction happening about all of these, really bad concepts. Obviously, the Bible teaches that the husband's the head of the household and the wife is his helpmate and all that good stuff. But what does that ultimately mean is the question. And, it's supposed to be a companionship. It's supposed to be a camaraderie. It's supposed to be, relational, not institutional, if you know what I mean. And
Mm-hmm.
so that transition began to occur, and we began to have a lot more life in the marriage, and also just learning to co-parent a son also that she had been parenting all by herself for 3 years was another challenge. So the first year of our marriage was very difficult, and through getting the right advice and having the right marriage mentor in our life, we were able to have a really good foundation laid.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So then how did you change things when you realized what the advice you had been given was maybe
Yeah.
not the best for you guys?
Yeah, it was I don't really know exactly, other than just realizing that I was wrong, because you can easily use scripture out of context or as a tool to get your way.
Mm-hmm.
So I realized I was misusing the Bible for selfish gain. And it was just coming to a realization. And I honestly was trying to be faithful to the Bible. And there was also, I wasn't realizing that my selfish tendencies were deceiving me into thinking, that somehow I was right. It was really silly to think back on. But when you're young and you're trying to figure out this whole Christianity thing and marriage and parenting all at the same time, it can be a major disaster if you're not careful. And so, I don't know. Do you have anything on that?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, so I think the fact that Kyle and I ultimately we stand on the word. Like it doesn't matter what you think, what he thinks, what I think.
Yeah.
What matters is what does the word say? And so because that is the foundation of who we are even separately, that it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter what the world or someone says, that we knew that it didn't matter what pastor, this pastor, that pastor, it doesn't matter what they were saying. So God really put us into a place where we got counseling from a pastor who we've never met before. And it was kind of like a counseling service that was going on. And it was the greatest thing that could have ever happened because he wasn't biased to one side or the other. He didn't know Kyle, he didn't know me, and all he did was teach from the word. And because of that, we were able to hear clearly instead of hear these things that were filtered from people, in a sense, trying to manipulate one side or the other. And I don't think, a part of me coming into a marriage with a child, I was independent. I was paying bills on my own. I was figuring things out on my own. I was raising a child on my own, disciplining, putting the kid to bed at night. I was doing all of these things. And then I have to come in and my heart is, okay, now I have to figure out how I do this with my husband. And my husband was given the advice of, she's the one who kind of wants to steer the wheel all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was given that, he took my independence the wrong way.
Yeah.
He took it as though, now you're trying to control me. Well, no, that's just all I've ever done. So now I'm just trying to learn how to make this work together.
Yeah.
And when we sat down with the counselor, it was just really eye-opening how our heart was really to love one another.
Yeah.
And it took a breaking point
Mm-hmm.
in our marriage where I called my stepdad up. I'm like, you better come get me now because I'm not going home with this man. And he did. And I go home and I was there, for a little bit. I'm talking with my mom and my mom just says, Amanda, you're not going to fix it here. So you better go home. And it was like the first time like I was kicked out for the best reason ever. I'm like, really? Can you just give me 20 more minutes? Like, can I just be mad for a little bit longer? And the best advice she ever gave me was go home to your husband because you won't fix it here. And that to me was the turning point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went home and I was mad. I mean, there were times I would, crawl into bed with my son at night for a couple minutes. But after that, it was like, oh, now I have to go to bed with this guy. And, it was awful. Like our first year of marriage was so awful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that I don't remember it, like to this day of every detail, because I do remember just like crawling in bed or something and just being so mad, like, please, like, let this go away.
Yeah.
And it was truly the fact that we were both willing to work on anything that came our way, and we were willing to work on it together.
Yeah.
And we got through it.
Yeah.
And I was pregnant too. So
Yeah,
that
exactly.
didn't help.
That didn't help either.
Right. That doesn't complicate things with hormones or anything.
I know,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, no.
So then you had a rocky start.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I want to hear a little bit more of how you got to this point, because I look at you guys and I see a good marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So God brought you through a lot of things. He helped you to fix a lot of things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How did that go?
Investing time,
Yeah.
nobody likes to hear that to have a good marriage, you have to put work into it, because the word work is like not appealing.
How
So I
would
don't-
you define it?
I don't know if I would, maybe I'm going to be saying the same thing with different words, but you have to make an investment, marriage is like a bank account. If you don't have anything in it, you can't make any withdrawals from it. So you have to be intentional about putting money in the bank. And so whether it be going to a marriage seminar or reading or something together or filling out some assessments, personality, every once in a while, filling out some kind of assessment to where we can learn how each other ticks better, or, just being willing to go beyond just getting home from work and saying hello to each other every day and just becoming roommates. I think that's the problem that can happen, is you can get into this, rhythm of where you go from being companions to just being roommates. And you have to be careful about that. And so it takes intentionality. You have to put more wood on the fire if you want it to keep burning. And so many different ways to do that. There have been ups and downs. There have been seasons where we were running on the hamster's wheel of ministry, and we have to have a nice argument to snap out of the spell of just being bogged down in your daily activities or whatever it may be. And I think that ultimately it's the work of the Holy Spirit in our life, just being sensitive to his voice Yeah, there's a lot to it. I don't know. Is there a more specific way you could ask? Like, is there a specific area?
I think,
Yeah.
well, while you were talking, I
Yeah.
was wondering, like, what advice would you give to a married couple
Mhm.
for, keeping the marriage alive, not just like becoming roommates, like you said,
Yeah.
because you also mentioned there are times of life when you are more busy, and
Yeah.
times of life when you might have a little bit more time. So how do you manage during those times?
Yeah. Don't be prideful.
Mhm.
So, like, you'll see this is a common scenario. One partner wants to go to counseling, and the other one says, well, you're the one who needs the counseling. You go. That ain't how it works. The two became one flesh. So, whether it's counseling or a marriage seminar or whatever it may be, what you see a lot is one spouse tugging at the other to go and make an investment in the marriage, and the other one thinks everything's just fine, and it's not. And so we don't like doing things that may tell the world I don't have my act together. And the fact of the matter is, nobody has their act together. Nobody
It's true.
does. And so if you want a marriage to be more than just an arrangement where you pay bills together and you live in the same home together, then you have to be able to pour into that area and continue to feed it, continue to water it. Otherwise, pride will kill the fire of love in your marriage. There's probably a lot of people who've been married many years, and they'll probably stay married many years, but they won't be happy, and they aren't happy. And it's because one of you have settled for status quo, for just getting by. And you tell yourself, well, at least my marriage isn't like so-and-so's. That's not a good way to think. Don't compare yourself to somebody who has a worse marriage than you. Compare yourself to someone who has a better marriage. We're not supposed to compare at all, but if you're going to do that, at least compare it with someone that challenges you to go to another level,
Yeah.
And so I think that pride really, really gets in the way, because one of the saddest things to watch is a marriage where one party is willing to make that investment, but the other party is either in denial or just altogether unwilling. And it takes two to tango. And I would say that laying down that pride is such a special thing to do, because you just don't know what you're missing if when you say, I'm not going to take steps to pour more money into the bank account. You're missing some really good withdrawals that you could be making. And I think oftentimes it sets the stage to where those partners begin to find satisfactions in things other than, the covenant marriage that God has given them as a gift. So it's really sad to me to watch people. It's not there's a lot of people that get divorced. That's very sad. But even sadder to me is people who are married and they just settle and they never really, experience everything that God has for their marriage.
They don't experience the purpose and the goals of marriage.
Yes.
Yeah. I think my marriage motto, and you'll probably hear me say this multiple times, just in relationship with me, is, fight for resolution. Don't fight just to fight.
Yeah.
And I think Kyle and I mean, we might fight unfair sometimes, but ultimately we are fighting for resolution and that communication. And so those two things right there keep me going. Is sometimes it's like, man, this is so small, but I need to tell him. This is so dumb, but I need to tell him, just so he knows what's going on in me, through me, in my life. And so communication over everything. I mean, he's my best friend. Like I wouldn't want to go to anybody else over things that are going in my life. I don't want input or advice from anybody else. This is the person that I want that from. And so as you build that like together, and as you build this deep communication of anything that happens, you're the one that I want to go to. And we both, both sides, we both do that, where it is so easy for us to go to each other, no matter how big or small something is. And then, if it does result in a disagreement or something, then it's all right. Well, let's fight. How do we really feel about this? Sometimes it's, well, the Bible doesn't say that, so we need to change our mindset.
Yeah.
Or so we have done well. I think that's one thing that I am just so in awe of God, of our marriage, because I do the compare game so much, where it's like, okay, well, like you open up a magazine, it's like, well, I don't look like that. And then I think, wait, I don't want to be that.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that person. Or you see someone on TV and it's like, oh man, I don't look like that. I'm not that way. And then I'm like, wait, the interviews I see of this person, I don't want to be that person. So you talk about compare games in marriage, and I look at other people's marriages, and
Yeah.
I haven't found one marriage I want to be like, because I love what God's doing in us.
Yeah.
So when you get to that point of knowing what God's doing, with Him being the foundation, there's nothing greater. And just ultimately, everything that we do is just wanting to please Him and please God, then everything is so much easier in a sense. It works out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you are a pastor and working in a church and surrounded by church every day.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always mean that people have God at the center of everything that they do, even though you think it should.
Yeah.
Right.
But you both have talked about how God is the center of everything that you do, like the scripture.
Yeah.
So how do you actively, I guess, like, God is a part of your marriage?
Right.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Looks like a lot of things. He's the most common topic of conversation. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know where to start. That's such a good question.
It is a good question. I think I can start with this. It's that pyramid where God's at the top of the pyramid, and He's got these direct lines going to each one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so because we are both individually living our lives for Christ, He's always the one that's going to be the center of anything that we do.
Yeah.
So whether it's friendships or, marriage or our children, because we have these direct lines with God that we are continuing to work on, it's something that's on the forefront of our mind every single day, is how do I do the best to please the one who is always in communication with me?
Yeah.
My intimacy with my husband comes from my intimacy with God.
Yeah. Yeah, I
That's
agree with
good.
that 100%. And I think that a lot of people have the wrong definition of marriage. The Bible teaches that marriage is a covenant. And what is a covenant? It's where you essentially give your life to someone else. It's more than a contractual agreement. It's a covenantal bond. Everything that's yours is mine, and everything that's mine is yours. That's a covenant. Everything that's yours is mine, and everything that's mine is yours. And so when you view marriage the right way, and your definition of marriage is correct, then you realize there's no contract that can be broken. You're in this thing till death do us part, because you have a biblical definition of marriage, and that now the Spirit of God inside of me is wanting to empower me to lay down my life for her.
Mm-hmm.
The Spirit of God inside of her is also doing the same. You have to be intentional about asking, how am I doing in meeting my spouse's needs? Because that's the ultimate gauge of whether you're operating within the covenant. So if both parties are doing their covenant responsibility, then both parties end up being happy, and even more happy than if you were trying to fulfill yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what's so amazing about the concept of a covenant. And then there's the function. Like, what is the function of a husband? What's the function of a wife? Both of them being equal in the sight of God in value, but different in function. And the function that we operate out of is geared towards the covenantal commitment. So what's my function as a husband? To cover. That's what it means to be the head. Doesn't mean to control, it means to cover. So you have to have the right definitions of these things so that you can know what your obligation is, essentially.
I always love hearing about this, about like marriage is one thing today in our modern society,
Yeah.
but going back to the Bible and what God intended marriage to be,
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marriage these days has been perverted, and not that those who have went through a marriage ceremony aren't married, but they may be operating under a concept of marriage that isn't grounded in Scripture, and as a result, they're not getting anything out of it except a lifelong roommate, and that's not God's design. So, a lot of times in olden days, there would be, something like an agricultural family and a mercenary family that would come into covenant with one another. And, one would have the skills of warfare. The others would have the skills of being able to produce, agriculture. And so as a result, one family would provide protection. The other family would provide resources.
Mm-hmm.
And the covenant that they would make with each other was until the last member of the other family died off, they had this sincere obligation. So the mercenary family was absolutely responsible for the safety and well-being of the agricultural family. And the agricultural family was absolutely responsible for providing resources to the mercenary family. So there's also a conversation that goes to, okay, what are my strengths and what are her strengths, and how do we cooperate with one another?
Mm-hmm.
Not cooperate, but cooperate. We begin to fill in each other's gaps, so to say, and we become a unit.
Mm-hmm.
So my role to cover is actually a whole lot more than, being the head of the household from the standpoint of controlling or dictating or whatever it may be. It is taking responsibility for the direction that things are going.
Yeah.
And knowing that I will stand before the Lord for everything. And I think that that's also interesting for the wife to take into consideration, that following his leadership is important because he is ultimately responsible before the Lord. That's a hard thing to imagine. I'm actually responsible for her before the Lord. That's very difficult for me to fathom.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean I try to control, but I have to ask myself, the word husband in the Greek means to nurture. It's a term that's used in terms of working with plants. That's why we have husbandry, The idea is a husband is supposed to be tilling the soil around his wife, removing weeds, covering her, making sure that water is in the soil, nutrition is there. Any bugs that are trying to, we kill bugs around the house. Every husband has to do that. But, any pests that are causing the plant to become sick or whatever it may be, that's what it means to cover someone.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, you're taking responsibility for the well-being of that person. And it's a very big task. And that's why the helpmate aspect that has been assigned to the wife is much more than just being along for the ride. It's actually recognizing that because this husband has such a huge responsibility before God, he truly needs help. He badly needs help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I look at that way too. Like, I don't just sit back and like, all right, dude, you got this. You're the one who has to answer to God. Like, do what you want.
Yeah.
No,
You're putting in work too.
Yeah, 100%. Because I sit back and I'm like, all right, how can I help you fulfill what God's called us to?
Yeah.
And then we come together and we do that and we figure it out in our own way of how things work within our home, outside of our home, with our schedules, with our kids, and I feel a huge responsibility. Now I find it funny. Yesterday he sent me a text and he's like, "What'd you say? I love you. You're the greatest wife." And I'm like, "What do you want?" Like, what's going on? And he's like, "Nothing." And I'm like, "What are you reading?" "Nothing. I just wanted to tell you I love you." And I'm like, "Okay, I love you too. How can I help? How can I help you?" And it turns into this conversation of, he's like, I just want you to know that I love you. And like, I love you too. And so I was like, you know what? One of the things I constantly ask him is, how can I help you love me? How can I love you better? How can I, because these things
Mhm.
change so much.
Yeah.
Our lives are constantly moving, and our kids are growing up. And so there's all these like little dynamics that are happening that, these things that constantly keep throwing at us. And it's like, what can I do? To help you love me? Is there something that I'm doing right now that am I, withdrawing? Am I, putting too much attention here or there? And what is it that I can do to help you love me more? And what
Mhm.
is it that I can do to love you more? And I think those kinds of things that we constantly ask each other. I feel like we have this continual like conversation with each other of, what do you want? What
Yeah.
do you need? How can I help you? And we both ultimately want to help each other in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then when you talk about, helping each other, is it just the little things in the day-to-day life, like, go here and pick up food for dinner because we don't have time for something? Is it like those
Everything.
things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I try to avoid like it coming off as if I'm giving her an assignment or she's giving me an assignment. It's more of, hey, can you help me out with this? I got a lot on my plate, da 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 da.
yeah.
And that's where the covenant mindset comes in. It's like, no, this person is my responsibility. It's really interesting how the Lord defines that.
You're taking care of each
You're
other.
taking literally
Yeah.
you've been given an assignment from God to take care of this person
Yeah.
on both ends, and that changes the dynamic. And you have to continue to let your mind be renewed in that regard, because you can go back to the carnal mindset, which is going to see marriage as something that you can get what you want out of.
Yeah.
And that is a horrible way. That is why I would say that is why marriages fail. You could trace every divorce probably back to that mindset of they got into it to get what they wanted rather than to honor the Lord and contribute what he, um, desired for them. Now, let me preface that there are those one-sided marriages where there was one spouse, fulfilling their obligation before the Lord and the other wasn't. And as a result, the marriage didn't work. But it still traces back to at least one of them decided, I'm going to look at marriage as something that I get what I want out of. And you end up just sucking the other person dry. They just end up becoming, lifeless, and you become this monster. And it's all about the renewal of the mind and seeing it the way that God defines it. And then how do you begin to apply that into your ordinary everyday actions? Well, when Amanda says, hey, can you take out the trash? It's more than, oh, I got to do my honey-do list. It's she needs help. She's got a lot on her plate. The Lord has put me in her life to be that for her. Of course, I'm taking out the trash. I'd be glad to. This is awesome. I'm worshiping the Lord by taking out. It's not like I go through that mindset, but that's ultimately the bigger picture of what's happening there is, contributing to the well-being of your spouse is an act of worship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was about to say, like, going through and doing the task that God has assigned you to do is honoring not only you, Amanda, but also God.
Yes.
And it's also affecting the people around you because people get to see that too.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Some of the biggest influences on my life with marriage are people that I observed, not necessarily people that I was taught by,
Right.
but I just watched the way they treated each other, and it was just amazing. And it inspired me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I think going back to your question on, what was it? What is exactly that when we talk about like, how do we love each other more? It went as far as, when we were at church the other day and we were talking to this person and you interrupted me to get your point across, like, can we not do that anymore? Something as deep as that, where it's like, well, what do you mean? I wasn't doing that. And it's like, okay, well, now let's talk through this.
Yeah.
And so we have these conversations of, okay, you interrupted me here with this person, or man, like, babe, your tone was just awful. And this person heard that, or, so there's those kinds where it's like really when we're out in public and how do we want people, like, how do we want to treat each other? And when we're in the home, we have those same conversations. Like, I really don't like how you talked to me just now.
Yeah.
They turn a little different, when it's us too. But we have those conversations and we don't let it go. We don't let anything go that is going to benefit us and who we are.
Yeah. Well, and there's also an element to that where you have to choose your battles too. Like if she, dropped a piece of trash on the ground, I'm not going to be lecturing her for 15 hours over it. Like I'll pick it up for her. That's probably the better thing to do. So you have to ask yourself, like, what is the risk and reward of this conversation? I believe sometimes. Is it just a human mistake that's like literally you don't want to nitpick? But if you see something like what she's talking about, where this could actually add benefit to a larger scheme in our marriage, let's talk about it. Let's work through it, because this could ultimately lead to a new pattern that brings life.
Right.
Yeah.
I think of like when women talk about, oh, my husband, he drops the socks next to the hamper instead of putting it inside. And I think about that, and I'm like, I think I used to be the person where it's like, oh, your dishes, babe, like put your dishes here or clean up after yourself. And then I slowly started to realize, oh my gosh, this is adding so much tension between us, where he's constantly on edge because if he does anything wrong, I'm going to say something, or I'm constantly, vice versa. And it's one of those things where I was reading something recently, and it's, pick up the socks for him, put it in the basket. Like sometimes that fight is not worth fighting in that moment. And I believe that when those things happen, the whole cliche of leaving the cap off the toothpaste, or, all these things that people talk about. I believe that when those things happen, if you just continue to love him or love her in a way of doing those things without them even knowing, without fighting, without talking about it, that eventually God will bring that conversation up when you guys are talking. And Kyle and I have something that the counselor in our first year gave us, and it was the temperature reading. And it's a temperature reading over, you ask these questions, but you don't ask it in the middle of a fight. It's something where you sit down in a neutral ground where nothing else is going on during the day. And it's like, hey, let's do a temperature reading.
Yeah.
And we sit down and we say, hey, you probably memorize this stuff way better than I do, but it's a part of asking the questions and finding out where you are on a daily basis that has nothing to do with starting an argument. It's all about learning and growing together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe that when these little things happen, it's not always the best idea to bring it up constantly, where you have the cliche of, oh, I have a nagging wife. Well, you know what? I would encourage anybody who's listening to this, stop nagging and just start doing it. If you want something done, then do it, and let God bring that conversation up on a neutral ground, and let that conversation happen to where it's not adding tension or fighting between the two of you. And if you can do anything to keep that common ground, I'm not saying we have that perfect, because we definitely are learning, but we're learning and growing in that so much more, where a lot of things aren't getting under our skin on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So now you mentioned the temperature reading. I want to know a little bit more about, like, what is that? What do you guys do?
Yeah. So it has a couple different parts. It always starts with appreciations. So you go back and forth and you try to not just say, hey, honey, I appreciate your good looks. You want to actually pick out something specific that they did. And
I
and point
appreciate
it
you
out.
picking up my socks every day. I notice they're not there when I come home.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Have you been doing
No.
that? I need to check.
Well, now that you mentioned it.
So think of something like, I appreciate that yesterday you sent me a text message, whatever it may be. It starts the conversation off in the right tone.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is new information. We have busy lives, especially now that we have smartphones in our pocket. We take work home with us, unfortunately, and stuff like that. And as a result of the busyness, you may forget to share something with your spouse that they need to know about. It happens a lot. Like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you tomorrow night I told so-and-so we'd be having dinner. Why didn't you tell me that 2 weeks ago so I could be ready? But
you're in a neutral ground where it's like you take a breath and you understand, okay, I realize this is exactly why we're doing this temperature reading.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not to make each other mad.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's
just a tool for your benefit.
100%.
It just teaches you to, like, all right, is there anything I need to tell them about that I haven't?
Yeah.
And then if you don't, sometimes the exercise also gives you, if there's like, if you're both caught up on everything, then you can just tell them some new information that's just very, relational. Like, hey, the other day I was talking to Ruth about how there's a lot of sickness in the church, and there's been a lot of people struggling with illness, and I'm considering bringing in an evangelist, sometime in the, sharing something like a conversation that happened in the office. It lets them in on your day,
Right.
Yeah.
and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is puzzles. So what is your spouse doing that confuses you,
Oh.
that you're making assumptions about?
Not everything.
Yeah. So it's so easy to
like at
make
the beginning,
wrong
it was like, oh my
assumptions.
gosh, my list is so long of what puzzles me about you.
Yeah. And if you're not careful, if you don't let that person answer those puzzles, you'll start making your own assumptions.
Yeah.
And 90% of the time, they're probably at least partially wrong, if not totally wrong. And so let that person and have trust and confidence. You got to give everybody an A on their forehead, essentially. You got to give them the benefit of the doubt. So you need to be able to say, okay, I don't know what a puzzle would be recently, but maybe it's, I noticed that you have the knives right side up instead of down in the dishwasher when you wash them.
You went there. Okay.
Why do you do that? Like, I'm thinking you want to kill our kids, but is there something more to that? Well, that's how I want to, have it to where the water, when it sprays, it cleans it better. And, that's the way we always did it when I was growing up. Oh, so you're not evil. Gotcha. Like,
I've seen both sides of that argument, knives up and knives down.
It's such a common argument. Yeah.
So what are you, knives up or knives down?
I'm knives down normally
Oh,
because
That's
it's
what I'm
safer
talking
to not it's safer to not accidentally grab the blade if you're like moving your hand very
Yeah.
quickly.
That's his argument.
But at the same time, sometimes the knives slip through the cracks.
Yeah.
And so then when the
And
water spinny thing is going around on the bottom,
Uh-huh.
I have busted silverware before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When you get kids in the house, it becomes even more relevant though, because they go running and they're so unpredictable, and the dishwasher might be open. Next thing you know, you got a kid falling on knives, so that's the bigger,
It's
like,
never happened.
if I was, yeah, it hasn't. Okay. No, but like when
we
you're
fixed
single,
it though, because now neither one of us do the dishes and our kids do them. And so
Yeah.
we teach them to put the knives down.
Yeah.
So it works out.
yeah. So, like, but when you're single or whatever, I mean, by all means, put one down and one up for all I care, but it just becomes more of a conversation when you have kids. So puzzles, hey, why do you do that? Don't believe the worst about your partner, essentially.
Right.
Mhm.
Give them a chance to speak up for why they do things the way they do.
Right.
And the puzzles part of the temperature reading is not necessarily to have that, well, you should put them the other way. It's like, okay, thanks for clarifying that for me. That
Yeah.
helps.
It's to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
yeah.
next
Sometimes
part-
it's just to say, okay, I hear you,
Yeah.
and I'm going to be quiet and just let you know that I hear you.
Or you could bring it into the next part, which is called concerns with recommendations, which it's not always like your puzzle flows over into that, but you could. So concerns with recommendations is where, all right, you've already told them how much you appreciate them. You guys have had a great conversation about new information. You've cleared up some assumptions about one another. It's feeling good.
Yeah.
Now's a good time to say, hey, I wish you would help me pick up your socks more. Could you, how do we work on that?
Yeah.
And the funny part about the way that we do that part is that the spouse has the option to respond however they want.
It's
Because
true.
this isn't an institution of slavery. This is two free will beings. So the spouse should say, I really struggle with that, and I don't know. I mean, I'll try, but I can't give any guarantees. And that may be frustrating.
Yeah.
But it's concerns with recommendations. And so the ideal thing is for that spouse to respond and say, yeah, I see where you're coming from. Or they may be able to respond and say, the reason I do that is because I'm so exhausted when I come in, and, I have to bathe all of the kids after a long day at work. And, could we talk about that a little bit? Like, maybe if I'm less exhausted, I'll be more it'll be easier for me to remember. Is there's
Right.
some give and
And then
take.
it turns into teamwork for both of you.
Right.
Yeah, so you can negotiate sometimes.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just a matter of saying, "Yep, you're right. I could do that better. That's
Mhm.
stupid. I could pick up those socks." Or it could be, yeah, I think the reason I'm forgetting that is, let's negotiate this. So there's a couple ways you can respond. And then the final thing is wishes, hopes, and dreams. So
Ooh.
you finish the temperature reading with, "Hey, what's on your mind? Like, one day I want to take an Alaskan cruise, or it could be, I was thinking this weekend after Halloween, we should put up the Christmas trees." Could be something that's way off in the future or just a few weeks down the road.
Yeah.
It could be me saying, I really want to write a book one day about how to pick up your socks, 3 ways to make sure your socks always land in the dirty clothes basket. Your marriage will be revolutionized. Anyways, that's essentially the daily temperature reading. And what we've recommended is when someone is getting married, like I've been doing some pre-marriage counseling recently for a couple, and I give that to them.
Mhm.
And I say, do this like for a week straight. And
Yeah.
then after doing it for a week straight, try to do it like once a week, and then over time, the idea, and it doesn't always work. Sometimes you got to go back and redo it and retrain yourself, is that mode of conversation and communication becomes second nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't
Alright.
know the last time we've done it.
I don't know. We
Time to
haven't
sit
really
down.
had to.
Yeah.
It would be good, even though we've been doing very well.
Right. Right.
and
it's kind of naturally within us now to
But you don't want to wait until things are bad to do it.
right.
No, yeah.
So,
but
yeah.
because we've done it so much, it's kind of already there. Like we already
Yeah.
speak in that way of,
Yeah.
Hey, what do you want? What are you looking forward to? Or what's bothering
Mhm.
you? And
Yeah.
so it's becoming more of a part of who we are. And I don't know, we kind of pull things. We do quizzes and stuff all the time, the temperature reading and
Love languages or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, we do stuff like that all the time where I kind of fight it too. He's like, "Oh, let's do this." And I'm like, "Really? Like, why? Like, we're fine." And then
Yeah.
we do it and we learn something. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a lesson in like, it doesn't have to be bad. You can be in a good marriage, but you can still learn more.
Yes. Always.
Yeah. You're never at a place, whether it's, with the Bible, with God, in a marriage, with a friendship, with your children, you're never at a place where you know it all.
Yeah.
No matter how old you are. And so because of that, like there is always growing that can happen.
Mhm.
Yeah. I like to say the only way to coast is down. So you
Oh.
never want to get into a place of coasting. And everybody does, but you got to catch yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's going to start deteriorating. The moment you stop putting money in the bank, you're going to start making those withdrawals are going to end up leading to a what's it called? A bounce, or, what do we call it? Overdraft. Yeah.
That's the word.
Overdraft.
It slipped my mind too.
Yeah. And it's just inevitable. And
Right.
so I think that you're exactly right. You just have to have a habit of investing. And it costs money sometimes. Sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes you have to make a monetary investment. And, it is what it is. Do it. It's going to be worth it.
Yeah.
I would pay money to avoid really bad arguments. Like I would seriously pay money because they are very, like we pay money for all kinds of other good feelings, don't we?
Right, right.
I pay money to rent a Netflix or a Redbox movie that may give me,
Warm, fuzzy feelings.
warm and fuzzy, or
Yeah,
a comedy, or we already, there's monetary value to your physical well-being. We all do it.
Yeah.
So you might as well invest money into your marriage. Buy a book, go to a marriage seminar, go on a marriage cruise,
Take them on a date.
Take them
Yeah.
on a date.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good one. Moving here to Flint and taking over a church has kind of interfered with that area,
Yeah.
because we're still getting to know people that can babysit our 4 kids,
Yeah.
but we still figure out ways around it,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, we do. We have day dates and
Yeah.
we'll, let the kids watch a movie and then we'll just say, "Oh, let's go spend some time together." And
Yeah.
so we figure it out. And because we do that and we make it important, in our home, our marriage is number one. If our marriage isn't good, our children, it flows from that. So, and in order, this move's been a lot on our family.
Yeah.
Good, bad. I mean, everything. There's been a lot to learn through. And so I know that both of us believe that if our marriage is firm, we'll get through anything because
Yeah.
we'll be able to get through it together.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we just have a few minutes left, but I want to know, I guess, what advice you've already given plenty of good advice, and this is great. I love it. I'm drinking this in.
Okay.
But what advice would you give to a married couple, and what advice would you give to a single person?
That's good. Do you have any?
Yeah. We gave a lot of advice to a married couple, but I would continue to, chip away at that pride element.
Yeah.
You have to realize that, with pride, your marriage can never be as good as it should be. So some people listening to this may need to go to counseling. Some people may just need to, make that investment that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Be intentional. Don't settle for a marriage that is simply an arrangement between you and another individual to live in the same home.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my best piece of advice. Like let those who have a marriage mentor. Have a marriage mentor. So if you, like with anything in life, if you want to learn how to manage finances better, you're going to go to somebody who's wealthy,
right,
and shows that they know how to do it. Then go to someone. But pride will get in the way of that. That's why I keep chipping at pride. Like, go to someone that you see their marriage and you want what they have, and ask them how they got it, and let them walk you through it.
right.
It's very simple. But if you're too afraid to admit my marriage isn't where I want it to be, then you'll never get to, anybody who has a good marriage has probably done that. They've probably went through some educational components, or had other marriages, or maybe they grew up in a good household and they spent their whole life observing a good marriage. One way or another, they didn't just, imagine the information that led to them having a good marriage. So you have to be intentional. For single people, and I'll let you speak to both these two things as well. I'll just talk to both of them real quick. I personally believe that God is wanting to prepare you for your spouse. So wait on the Lord. Wait on the Lord, and that waiting process should have action involved. Begin, if you really feel that you're called to be married, start investing in that right now. Start learning about marriage. Start educating yourself on how you can be a good spouse. And if you have habits in your life that would be unproductive in your marriage, if you have sins in your life that need to be dealt with, let part of the motivating factor of getting that sin out of your life so that you can be, in a good position to take on a spouse.
Yeah.
And you're not bringing toxicity into the marriage. So take a proactive approach of preparation. Don't think that God's just going to drop that perfect spouse into your lap with
and
you.
Everything's going to be fixed.
Yeah. And you're taking no proactive measures to get ready for that. So for example, for me, and both Amanda, God had to get sin out of our life first.
Yeah.
Then he had to fill in some knowledge gaps that we didn't have, and all kinds of stuff, so that when the time was right, he would entrust one of his daughters to me. He would entrust one of his sons to her. This is insane. Like, God is literally saying, this is my child. I'm not going to give them to you if you're going to destroy them. And so as a result, think in that mindset. Be spiritually engaged in your church and in the things that God has called you to do. Be a giver. Create a habit of giving. So see your spiritual progression as not just something between you and the Lord, but also something that's preparing you strategically for a happy future with a spouse. So I would say 90% of people or more are probably called to be married. Paul lays it out. People say, well, are you sure the Lord wants to give me a spouse? Well, the Bible pretty much says he does, because unless you're one of those special categories where you have been given the gift of celibacy, a supernatural ability to remain single and be content, then you're probably in the category of those that God is expecting you to find a spouse. So what is his plan? Well, look at Genesis. For Adam, it was for Adam to busy himself with the work of the Lord and allow God to bring Eve to him. That's what I believe. Now, as a result, there are exceptions to the rule, where God, says, hey, maybe he speaks to you, says it's the season for you to find a spouse. And maybe you're supposed to utilize, eHarmony, or, maybe that person in the church that God's been speaking to your heart about, you need to go ask them on a date. Like, don't sit around. There was an element to where me waiting on Amanda could have become that, but the Lord got my attention and everything made sense. But I had to make an effort. I couldn't just say, all right, Holy Spirit, when she prays, tell her to meet me at Chili's at 5:00. Like, so at some point you just got to say
some effort for your marriage.
Yeah.
Yep. You just got to be willing to just step out and do what you think God has called you to do. So let God make you into a clean vessel, because you want him to entrust. You don't want him. Let me ask you, Ruth, as a single person, do you want God to bring an unclean man to your life?
No.
So like that, nobody wants that. So do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Become the person that you want to marry, and let the Holy Spirit bring that work into your life.
Yeah, I don't think we realized that what God was doing in us before we married. Like looking back, we know all of this. We know that God was preparing us to be the husband and wife that he wanted us to be. But when I was going through it all, I wasn't sitting down and studying or reading books or asking questions on the mere fact of, all right, God, you want me to be this, pastor's wife. I didn't even know any of that then. Honestly, like when even God showed me the dream, I didn't know he was a pastor. I didn't know he wanted to do that. I didn't know God called him into that. And so I wasn't studying to do things in a way to where my life was to be lined up to be the wife of a pastor.
Yeah.
I was studying purely because my heart was to know Christ and to know what he wanted me to do ultimately for him. And because of that, when we got together, we were both doing the same thing. Looking back, it was the greatest thing I could have ever done. It aligned me to know that everything that I do in marriage is because God calls me to do anything to help him, to help us too. I am probably, I don't know if I'm old fashioned, I don't know what you call it, but before we ever got together, I was tempted, in the 2-year waiting period to go on to like Christian Mingle or whatever it was called, right? And so I did, I researched, I even tried to sign up for the free 60 days or whatever they have, and I just knew, all right, God, I'm doing this and it's a distraction. It's distracting me from you.
Yeah.
It's distracting me from my life and what you have going on in the ministry that I'm able to put out right now. And so because I went through that, I'm a firm believer that I do believe that these things are distractions. I'm not necessarily a believer in having to do that. If you're somebody who's on it, I'll support you. Yeah, go ahead and do that, but don't get distracted from the ministry that God's called you to.
Yeah.
Do not let that be something that is overtaking your life.
Yeah.
And I've seen so many times where, people are getting so distracted by things where, well, God's called me to this, so I'm going to go ahead and move in a way where, I'm going to show up at a bar, or I'm going to go on to Christian Mingle, or I'm going to go on to this. And it's wait. Are you really fulfilling what God's called you to do now? And so if you're not fulfilling what God's called you to do, whether it's in your job or in the church or whatever it may be, don't let those things distract you, because God can bring a person into church just like he did for me. He can bring a person anywhere.
He's big enough. Yeah.
He is so much bigger than Christian Mingle and eHarmony and the bars and everything else.
I think at the bottom of what you're saying is, don't let the foundation of your relationship be a fear of loneliness. That's what's leading a lot of that. Obviously there are probably cases where the Lord says, yeah, I have someone for you, and the method I want to use is eHarmony. I'm not against that.
Right.
But if you have to ask yourself, what is your motive? Is it this fear of loneliness that's leading you to sign up, or is it the Spirit of God?
Mhm.
And so if the relationship is born in fear, then it's going to have this foundation. Now it's going to go from a fear of loneliness to a fear of losing.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be possessive. And then it's not going to be a happy marriage.
Right.
So it's like, lay the right foundation,
Right.
let it be spiritually born. For us, it was literally orchestrated sovereignly and providentially by the Lord. I think God can do that again. I think that the way he does that is probably diverse. But at the end of the day, we have to be constantly asking the Lord to search our hearts and show us if there's any offensive way in us. Are we trying to make this happen, or are we really letting him lead the way? Because it's so much better when you just let him do it, because our judgment and ability to choose the right spouse is highly flawed.
Yeah.
And once you are married, the Lord is expecting you to honor that covenant. And you
Mhm.
might marry somebody, that I don't know if there's this idea of like God has chosen one specific, like, if you married them, he knew you would and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes waiting is better, because he will bring that person that is going to be the right fit, rather than, you thinking that, I actually know somebody right now that I'm thinking of. And I remember talking to this person many years ago. And they were under the assumption that if they found somebody who was compatible with them, that would be right. Like, I explained to them the way that God brought me and Amanda together, and they were like, well, that's good. I like that. But you didn't know anything. Like, you didn't know if you guys brushed your teeth the right way. Like, you didn't know, like, on these search engines that you find, a mate through, it's all about compatibility. It gets into super deep details, like what colors and this and that and sports and common things, and
Oh, wow.
even into the intimate area.
Mhm.
He goes into that. And he's like, I want to know what I'm getting before I get it, and I'm like, okay, it sounds like the foundation of that relationship is going to be how compatible the two individuals were for that season of their life. But people change.
Yeah.
That's the problem with that. The person that you marry may not be the person you're continuing to be married to 10 years later.
Mhm.
So if the foundation of the relationship is simply compatibility, and we know that compatibility is fluid, then what does that mean? So at the end of the day, it needs to be a relationship that's born and conceived in the mind of God, is what I believe. And Amanda and I have so many areas that we have a difference of an opinion on. I don't know if the eHarmony would have matched us or not. Like, I'm not sure. I think we've actually become more compatible over time, because God has knitted our hearts together, and her interest and my interest, they kind of, we don't agree on everything, but they get closer and closer over time.
Yeah.
I think that's the better approach. So I'm not going to down those, websites. Maybe I know people who've gotten married through them. They're doing great.
Yeah.
But it's all about, what is the foundation of the relationship? Is it Jesus Christ? Is it conceived in the mind of God?
Yeah.
And we've got to trust him with it.
Well, and at the beginning, just to kind of wrap this up here, because I know we're at that time, but at the beginning, you even talked about how we had dysfunction that we saw, that we went through, and all that before we ever got together.
Yeah.
And so we lived dysfunctional lives. We lived our lives far away from God. We lived our lives with God, and disobeying Him. We've done it all. And so ultimately, when we come together, we're coming together as two dysfunctional people. And so when we got married, no one told me how hard marriage was. Marriage is the hardest thing on the face of the earth, the hardest thing. And so, I mean, even
Only marriage to me.
I know. I was gonna say.
Yeah, no, it really is.
I must be a bad guy. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it is so hard, because it just takes a lot of good work, of good solid work, and you are really taking two dysfunctional people together, where Satan wants to bring up the past. And you talk about just intimacy, even in the bed and outside the bed. It's like, well, this is what I knew, so obviously when I come in, this is what it's going to be like. Or man, it was so good when I was sleeping with this person out here, and so you can't match up to that. And God's like, no, hold on, wait. I have so much more on the other side of all of this.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to communication and intimacy and growing together, we have to learn how to grow two dysfunctional people with Christ being the center of it all. And so because we're doing that, I mean, I'll just piggyback on what you said. If Christ is the center, just make sure he is, and it's not about what you want. It's not about your selfish desires of anything. It's about fulfilling what God's called you to do.
Yeah, because that will filter into every element of the marriage.
Yeah, for sure.
You know,
Yeah.
you want Christ to be the middle of your parenting, parenting philosophy, Christ to be the middle of your communication, the spirit of your communication, firstly, but also the strategy of it, the wisdom of it. Even when you get to things like sex, you want Christ to be in that, because it goes from that, which I was talking about earlier, where you've made marriage into this thing that you are going to get what you want out of. Well, sex becomes that too within marriage, where it's this idea of what can I get out of it for me? But if Christ is the center of it, it's what can I contribute? How can I be, asking the opinion of my spouse and taking that into consideration? And it becomes this element, this area of your relationship that is a place where you can love each other more rather than take from each other.
Yeah.
So you just take that and you put it into everything. Say, how am I doing with that when it comes to the chore list in the home or any element of the marriage? It's always like, what does it conceptually mean for Christ to be the center of it? That covenant relationship aspect. You're putting the needs of your spouse before your own.
Right.
Easier said than done.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what makes Christian marriage unique to anything else in the world, if done right. And I think what we get is, instead of Christian marriage, we get religious marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Two different things. A lot of what's named Christian marriage is just a religious marriage. Mm-hmm. You want a Christ-centered marriage infused with the Holy Spirit, where he's empowering you to be selfless more and more. Yeah. We're being conformed to the image of Christ systematically by the power of the Holy Spirit. And sometimes that it's a slow work of God.
Yeah.
It's a slow work of God, but you can trust the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this was really good conversation.
I hope so. I hope it's helpful.
I think we've all learned a lot.
Okay,
all right, good.
Did you want to close us out?
Sure. Father, we pray for those who have tuned into this, God, that are either struggling in their marriage, or maybe they're doing good and they want to do great. Lord, would you just be at work in the marriages of our church, in the marriages of our community, and in the marriage of anyone tuned into this podcast. Father, we declare a new season, a new direction, a new philosophy, a new mindset over every person under the sound of my voice. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We'll see you next week. God bless.